Welcome back to the Not Quite Pod. Today we've got Blaine with us. Blaine, do you just want to quickly introduce yourself and let everyone know a bit about yourself?
My name's Blaine Harrison. I'm a musician, songwriter. I play in a British indie band called Mystery Jets. I was born with a disability, spina bifida, so I've had it all my life. A lot of people don't necessarily know that, people who follow the band, so I still get asked questions all the time by fans, what happened? And I say, well, I've always been on crutches. So that's always been, big part of my life, but I've tried to not let it kind of get in the way of pursuing, my goals and dreams, which has always been to make music and to make art. I went to art school. Like a lot of musicians, I'm a failed art student, but I still am passionate about, all sorts of creative projects. And that's really how I spend my time. And more kind of working with other artists a bit more on kind of mentoring side of things and production as well.
Awesome. One thing I always do with my guests is get them to run through sort of their history, what it was like growing up for them, some of the challenges they faced, some of the good things, some of the bad things, just to sort of give people who don't know you a little bit of context as to like what's got you to where you are today.
So, like I said, I was born with disability, grew up in London. I moved to France with my mum and my sister when I was about 8 years old. And so I got to experience a little bit of what it's like living in a foreign country, learning another language. So that was quite a big part of my childhood growing up. Complete contrast to London, growing up in the countryside where, everything was, all the culture that reached us was always like a year after the UK. So albums came out later, films came out later, all that kind of stuff. So I had friends sending me, CDs. Well, it was cassette tapes at that time, but it was cassette tapes and then like magazines and books and stuff. So I think that enabled me to kind of appreciate, like, I suppose, a slightly more, a rural experience when I was a kid, which I really valued a lot. And then for secondary school, I came back to the UK and I went to school just near Reading, where the festival is, just quite near there. And then that's around the time that sort of started taking things a bit more seriously with the band when we were teenagers. We did our first tour the year we left school. So I would have been, 17.
Wow.
We booked our own tour across the UK and, no money. We just had a van and a big block of hash. I just played to whoever would happen to be in any of the towns, really. We didn't have an audience. We didn't have a fan base, nothing like that. But we just, I guess we just really believed in it. And it was a really tight group of friends that was in the band at that time. And we just carried on pursuing it. And then a little bit later on, like I said, I went to art school and I kind of found myself much more involved in, I suppose, a bit of a scene, really, of other students, other kind of young people who were forming bands, going out partying quite a lot. And we started throwing these parties on a place called Eel Pie Island, which some of your listeners or viewers might be familiar with. It's this really interesting place in the west of London, in a place called Twickenham, where the rugby is. And Eel Pie Island is this, it's sort of like the land that time forgot. It's like it's like stepping back into like an Enid Blyton novel or something like that. It's so kind of prosaic and like pastoral, old. I don't know. It's quite a mystical place. It's got a really rich kind of musical heritage, and so that was, in a way, that was the best place for us to kind of launch a career in music. Not that we've ever really seen it as a career, but essentially that's when music became a kind of full-time thing for us.
That's
and we
amazing.
Started playing a lot more shows and signed our first record deal. And that was kind of the start of, I suppose, my journey that's kind of led me up to where I am now in music. And, I think that's probably about it.
No, that's amazing. I mean, one other question I wanted to ask you, like, in the music you've created, you've sort of tapped into a lot of different genres, different types, and sort of taken bits from everywhere. Where has like the love of music come from?
Well, I think that's very much true. I think particularly my band Mystery Jets have always been kind of musical magpies. We've never really felt comfortable fitting into any particular genre or scene. And I think part of that has come from really our musical kind of gateway was our parents' record collection, which, you know, growing up in the 90s, I suppose it was, my dad had kind of grown up on like 70s rock. So it was, you know, it was stuff like lots of David Bowie, Pink Floyd, and then some slightly more kind of esoteric stuff like prog rock, basically, like Genesis, King Crimson, Yes, stuff like that. So in a way, we came from quite a kind of, I don't know, quite a kind of slightly oddball, eccentric musical kind of starting place. And then I suppose just as we evolved as songwriters and as musicians, we kind of, other things found their influence into our music. And it was things like, you know, I guess bands like the Smiths, The Cure, Coral, and then that kind of explosion in the early 2000s where it was, you know, it's bands like The Strokes and The Libertines, Block Party, a lot of bands that we got to tour with as well down the line as well. You know, I think everyone that we've sort of shared our journey with has sort of influenced our music. And then we spent time in America as well. We made an album in America. So that kind of changed our sound a little bit.
Because I must admit, when I listened to some of your stuff, I was getting, and if this is an insult, I apologise, I was properly getting like Arctic Monkey vibes. It was felt very Arctic Monkey-esque. It was very nostalgic for me as well, because now I'm a bit of a rap head, but when I was younger, I went through a massive indie phase, so it was very nostalgic for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were very fortunate. Like when the band sort of first broke out, we were very fortunate to find ourselves in this very, like, I don't know, it's just a very exciting time for guitar music in Britain at that time. And, you know, bands like the Arctic Monkeys and, like I said, Block Party, Future Heads, I mean, so many indie bands from that time, they sort of became our friends really, and we did a lot of tours together. It was kind of in the golden era of like the NME, when the NME was still big thing, you know. Obviously it's not really in print anymore, but at that time the NME really was like the kind of the Bible for indie bands, and it was a very exciting time to be young and in a band really. And so yeah, I mean I feel the same nostalgia listening back to music of that time as well, you know, all those guitar records and, you know, buying skinny jeans at Top Man and all that stuff.
Yeah. Remember that as well. I also read that, I might be wrong, but in my research, I also read that your dad's quite a big part of the band.
Exactly, yeah. So Henry is, not only did he sort of introduce us to music via his record collection, he then went on to become a really big part of the band. And still to this day, he still co-writes all the lyrics with me. So he's, you know, he's from a different generation. He's from a generation that I suppose, well, he didn't find his culture kind of on the internet and on things like this. It was very much from like books and records and cinema. So his influence has definitely shaped the story of the band in a big way. And he did play live with us for many years, more towards the beginning, but he still jumps up on stage with us if we're doing like a special London gig or something like that. He'll still jump up.
Amazing. And I'm guessing you guys have got a really good relationship. It's not like, oh God, Dad's at it again. He's on stage again.
It can be a bit like that. But, no, generally speaking, it's great. It's really, you know, it's great. And I suppose, you know, anyone with a disability perhaps would relate to this. When you're growing up, perhaps when your mates would be going and like kicking a football about with their dad, or like, you know, going to watch a match or going swimming, basketball, whatever it is. If you're someone in a wheelchair, as I was when I was a kid, you find different ways of engaging with both your friends and with your family. And I think that's what music provided for me and my dad in our relationship. It provided a kind of, you know, a glue bonding. And a connection point, a bonding, exactly. Yeah. And it was really over music that we bonded. And then that's just basically continued through ever since childhood. And then still to this day, that's what we do. We hang out every week and we write music, you know, still. So
That is awesome, and also like I can imagine, like by looking at it from outsider's perspective, the idea of going into anything like record deal negotiations and things like that with your dad. On one hand, it's like, okay, we've got some experience and like an older head on their shoulders, but then on the other hand, it's like, butt out, dad, leave me alone. So what was that? What was that journey like with the other band members? And obviously, when you started getting record deals and things like that, how did that dynamic work?
Well, I think definitely there was points, particularly probably in our 20s, where we're all a little bit older now, in our 30s, but when we were in our 20s, there was definitely points where we were getting quite heavily into like the partying and, you know, going out a bit too much. And I think at that point there was a bit of a sense of like, maybe just need to give us a bit of room, let us go off and do our own thing a little bit. But on the flip side of that, I think having Henry, my dad, as part of the band has meant that it's basically, like you said, you know, having a kind of older head on his shoulders, it's allowed us to kind of view this as a bit more of a business, which you need to, you know, even if you're starting out in music, whether you've been in it, if you're new to it, if you've been in it for a long time, you have to recognize that it is a business and it needs to be thoroughly thought through, and you need to have security in order to be doing this in 10, 20 years time, 30 years time. And I think fortunately my dad had previous experience, he was basically a trained architect, and so he's always been self-employed. And so like you with your parents, he's very much been there as a kind of a voice of wisdom to help us just kind of manage whatever money does come in through the band, to manage that money. And so we've been very fortunate to have that guidance through it. And, you know, I think for a lot of bands that came out at our period, the same era as us, a lot of those bands, unfortunately, and I'm friends with some of them, you know, it didn't last very long, because you're 19 and you sign, or you're 20, you're 21, you sign your first record deal and you're like, I'm going to get that guitar I always wanted, and I'm going to go out, I'm going to buy all my friends dinner, I'm going to go on lovely holidays and all that sort of stuff. And before you know it, the money's all gone. And, you know, that can lead to all sorts of different problems. So we've always been very prudent with the way that we've sort of financially sustained ourselves. And that's kind of the boring side of things, I guess, but it's kind of important because it has such a connection to your mental health and just your well-being and the way that you organize your time and kind of feel fulfilled by what you do. So I think it's been a really important factor of why we're still here doing this, you know, 15 years later.
I mean, as well, I think it comes into that whole thing of often in many walks of life, whether it be music, whether it be just in general, we're always presenting as like wanting to show that we're doing the big things, we're making loads of money, we're doing the big holidays. So they're like, particularly in the music scene, there's that culture of like showing off because you want to show that you've been successful. And I think it's right of like having your dad in the band and helping you zoom out of it has been really helpful, and not get sort of sucked into that rock star. I'm using rock star lifestyle as a really big cliche. I apologize. That sort of ilk, if that makes sense.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, I think what you're describing there, that's in a way it feels like a kind of a new phenomenon. Obviously, not the sort of the trope of the rock star, but this thing of where artists now have to present an image of themselves where, you know, they're living their best life all the time. And I think really social media has been the driving force behind that. And I think I really feel for younger artists coming through now who feel like they have to play this game, because the harsh reality is that so much of your time as a musician is spent in dark studios, you know, just like tearing up bits of paper, throwing it in the bin, you know, just like pulling your hair out. That's what so much of being an artist is. And the kind of, you know, the glory moments, which is being on stage and travel and festivals, you know, that probably accounts for like 20% of it really, and the rest of it is really just like is the grind. And I think because we're from that sort of slightly older generation, before social media that wasn't so much of an issue, because you could have, I suppose, more kind of mystique around being an artist. You didn't need to be engaged socially all the time, and you could just go away, you could make a record, come back when there's new music ready. Whereas now you really do need to be kind of visible at all times. And I don't know an artist that doesn't struggle with that in a way, because it's like no one's living their best life all the time. You're just not. You're grinding away, and
Well, we see it as well with like TikTok artists now that have blown up through TikTok. They're like releasing new music like every week, and it's almost like that. I can imagine that pressure of having to constantly produce new music. And I have it as a content creator.
Yeah.
You're constantly like, oh my God, I've got to get content out. So as a musician, it must be 12 times worse, because you're like, I want this to work. And for this to work, I've got to basically keep churning it out.
Yeah, exactly.
What advice would you give to a young artist? Like, obviously, the industry's changed a lot in the last few years, but like using some of your experience, what would some advice that you give to some younger artists out there?
I think it would just be the kind of age-old message that people have said going back donkey's years, which is just make the music, make sure you're making it for you. Don't we're not suppliers, we're artists. And I think your songs, the songs that will resonate with the largest audience, if that's what you're after, if you're up to your music kind of traveling as far as possible, it's going to be the things that you feel are a representation of who you are as an artist, not what you think people want to hear. And that, the same applies, is the most obvious thing to say, but the same applies to someone writing a book or someone making YouTube videos.
Yeah.
It's like, make YouTube videos about the thing that you're passionate about and that you're a geek about, and that the things that you nerd out over. There's going to be people out there that just like receive the enthusiasm you're putting into what you're doing. And that's the thing about it, which is going to draw people in. It's not feeling like, here's a bunch of, like songs that I think people want to hear. Here's a book that I think the world would like to read, or here's, a YouTube video about something I feel like is going to be popular. It's like, no, just make stuff about what you love and you're fascinated with. Tell your story, and that's always the most interesting thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and then it's authentic as well. Like, it's the real you rather than a version of you that you feel that you have to constantly present with. Because then also you're almost having to, I'd imagine, you're almost having to put on a mask every time you go on stage or meet a fan or do anything like that.
Totally.
It's not you.
I think, you see this time and time again, whenever people try to sort of second guess what is going to be popular or what an audience wants, it's never right. It's just like, it never lands, because you can't second guess what people are going to get excited by. And TikTok's a really good example of that. Like, the things that have gone viral on songs that have gone viral on TikTok, they're never the ones that the artist has spent like or the record labels have spent tons of money on. You can do that, but that doesn't mean that anyone's going to like it.
Yeah.
It's the little kind of, it's just things that have a little bit of magic about them. And it doesn't matter if it's like the most lo-fi thing that sounds like it was recorded through a shoe, or if it's like, it really doesn't matter. It's just got to have something that's kind of, as the word you use, like authenticity. I think that is the key thing for anyone who's a creator or who's a musician or an artist. I think authenticity is king. It always has been,
I think as well, it's really interesting to draw the commonalities around content creation and music creation, because we see the same thing as a content creator. You think, oh my God, this post is going to do really well. You post it, you spend an hour editing it, and it does nothing. And then you'll post a random outfit pic that all of a sudden goes everywhere. And you're like, hang on, what? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
100%. One other thing I wanted to ask as well, obviously coming back to the record label thing. Now, whenever record labels and like the interaction with record labels is shown in the media, it's very like over dramatic. It's very like, oh, this happens, it all kicks off, the record label was the demon. What is like dealing with record labels, getting signed and all of that journey? What is it actually like?
It's changed so much over time. And I think like when our band started out, there was much more, there was a much greater sense of you know, the artist's job is to make the music and obviously to play the shows, but then basically, essentially, a lot more of it was left to the label to promote it and to shout about it, to publicize it, to distribute it, all this kind of thing. Whereas actually, I think it's more DIY than that now. It's kind of as DIY as it's ever been since punk, in a way, because, you know, in the 70s with punk bands, they were making their own flyers and they were making fanzines and all that kind of stuff. But like the modern day equivalent of that is making your own content. That's what it is. Yeah. And so I don't know if record labels, obviously this is all dependent on what sort of category of artist you are, what your scope is. If you're a huge artist, you know, if you're Adele or if you're Pharrell or Calvin Harris or someone like that, I think a record label still does have a huge influence over getting your music to your audience. But I think even bands that I know that are kind of, you know, I always relate everything to like venues in London. I think it's being a Londoner, but like bands who are kind of Brixton Academy level bands, or, you know, or like even, I don't know, even up to like arena bands sometimes, they're like, it's still down to them to generate the content. And, you know, the labels now more than ever, the labels saying, oh, can you record a video we need to sell out the tour? Can you just do like a piece to camera, really authentic, just make it like, you know, just when you're having your morning cup of coffee, and you start to feel like, oh, there's something so twisted and kind of wrong about this. Yeah. But it essentially does follow through, because people want to see a kind of, they want that kind of level of intimacy with artists. And you see this with bands as big as like, I don't know, Paramore, a band like that, like Hayley Williams. She's still, you know, it's like, she's the most personable, like, rock star you could imagine. It's like, she speaks to her audience on such a kind of direct level, and it 100% works. It's really powerful. So I think that is the industry these days. But, you know, the record label's still doing stuff behind the scenes. I just don't know quite what.
Yeah, I get that. Well, the other thing I wanted to ask was about touring. So you mentioned that obviously you've done a lot of touring, and then also I can imagine that has evolved as the band's grown, as you've grown as people, and as you're older, like kind of, as you said, you've had some wild times and you've sort of calmed down a bit. So what's the journey been like with touring, and what does that actually look like? Because I think whenever I see any artist touring, it just looks so intense. And like, as much as you can see that they love it, you can see that also there's a little bit of them that's absolutely shattered.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a bit like being an athlete. You know, I think with being a touring musician, you have to sustain yourself, and you can't go out every night. I mean, we all tried to when we were in our 20s, and you know, the shows probably suffered to an extent, but it was like, that was just an important part of being like young and in a band. Whereas I think people view it differently now. People view it in more of a career sense. And you know, I think a lot of that's come down to phones at shows. You know, a video of you sounding like crap on stage is going to travel around and people are going to see it. So you kind of have to have your A game on when you're playing shows all the time now. So I think, I don't know, we just look after our voices. That's a big thing for me as a singer. I think, like, you know, I don't stay up as late as I used to. You know, I make sure I kind of, if the crew is staying up and getting drunk, I have one, and then I kind of check out and go to bed. And then, I don't know, we try to get days off in between, you know, shows where possible. So we'll often do like 2 or 3 shows and then a day off, 2 or 3 shows and then a day off. And I think that's a big help, just so you can, like, I don't know, just find somewhere with a gym or with a swimming pool where you can just go in, like, detox for a day. That's been a big thing for us. And then, I don't know, just like, I suppose it's just we're a bit kinder to ourselves than we probably were when we were younger, and we just don't push it as hard. I mean, we still play for a long time. Like our shows are like an hour and a half. That's around how long we play for. So it's a bit of a marathon, but you get so much adrenaline back from the audience that it kind of powers you through. But I don't know. Yeah, I mean, touring's great, but there's a lot of kind of dead time where you're not on stage. You know, there's a lot of waiting around, so you start to kind of find other things to do. And I don't know, I used to go to zoos a lot when I was younger. I mean, I don't believe in zoos. I'm kind of ethically very against zoos now, but when I was younger, that's what I used to do. I'd get to a new city on tour and I'd go and hang out in the zoo, and they'd be like, right, it's stage time in a couple of hours. Whereas now what I'll do is I take a sketchbook around with me and I'll just work on a bit of art in the daytime. Or we'll go for like a nice meal or go swimming, stuff like that. So we just try and look after ourselves a bit more, really.
One thing you mentioned there was obviously looking after your voice. Now, for the average Joe, we don't tend to do that. How do you look after, like, you hear it like in the news with artists having to make sure they look after the voice, but how do you actually do that?
To be honest, I've gone down a bit of rabbit hole with all sorts of like potions and lotions and snake oil, but a lot of it is like, it's really down to getting enough rest, not eating before a show. I generally won't eat before playing a gig, and then also just having a really good warm-up routine. And I've worked with a bunch of different like voice coaches and stuff over the years, so I've sort of developed my own coping strategies, because there's been like in festival season particularly, where you might be doing like 3 festivals in a weekend, and you know, you're doing press in the day, and so you're chatting in the day, and then you're singing in the evening, and then you've got to travel at night and then do it all over again. You know, the voice is such a kind of fragile instrument that you do have to kind of find. I've had some really hairy moments over the years, but thankfully I've never had to cancel a gig because of losing my voice. I do have like some like emergency warm-up techniques that I use.
Fair enough. No, that's fair enough. As I say, I just always think, like, as someone who attends gigs, you're screaming, you're shouting, and then you wake up the next day and you're like, oh my God, I can't talk. So as the artist, it must be like, oh my God, I've got to do that all over again today.
Yeah, it's terrifying. You know, I think particularly as a vocalist, it's something that gives you a lot of anxiety, but I think you've just got to, the best thing is just rest and hydration, and just not, you know, less of this after gigs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think it's like you say, that's even harder if like you're doing press, meeting and greeting fans and stuff. That becomes really tricky because you don't want to almost pull out of that, because you know it's a big part of it, and you want to give. I'd imagine you want to give back to the community, but then also you want to make sure the guys that are sending your show tomorrow get the same level of show that the guys got today. So yeah, I can imagine it's a really tricky thing to negotiate.
Yeah, it is. It is. I always just think like the golden rule is the show is, you know, that is the most important thing, and everything else can sort of just like, it takes, you know, it takes second place. The show is the most important thing. So all that other stuff, you don't really feel too bad about checking out of it all. Just like, you know, if I've got to sing tonight, that's the number one thing. Yeah. And if it means I need to be the most antisocial person in the room, that's what I'm going to do. You know what I mean?
Fair enough. It's fair enough. One thing I also wanted to touch on was, obviously you mentioned in the beginning that you have a disability, you have spina bifida. How has that impacted performing, being part of a band? Because like, I know from going to pubs and clubs in London, like, yeah, accessibility is not really their top priority. It's not the one. So how have you negotiated that when it comes to like going to your own gigs, then doing touring? That's a lot to manage, even as someone that doesn't do it often. Like, yeah, doing it often, I'm like, oh, I'd end up losing patience with it.
I feel you on that. You know, it's a kind of, it's an everyday challenge, if I'm honest. I was in a wheelchair when I was a kid, and then I moved on to crutches when I was a teenager. So around the time that I started with the band, I was touring on Crutches, as I still do. But there was one tour which was around the time of our first album, and I had a leg injury, so I had to actually do a UK tour, or most of a UK tour, in a wheelchair, and it completely changed my whole view of what touring with a disability looks like. Not even just touring, but just what accessibility to venues looks like. Because I think to a degree, I think being on crutches is it's a privilege to some extent, because there's lots of things that I can do, but being that wheelchair for that tour, it just totally opened my eyes to just how inaccessible so much of our industry is, and how much I relied on my bandmates basically, and on the crew that worked in local venues, because we didn't really have any of our own crew in that time. So it's just how much support I relied on other people for. And it really opened my eyes. And that's around the time that I started working with an organization called Attitude is Everything. And they are an organization who basically work with the music industry they're basically revolutionizing access to events, working from both the point of view of fans and also artists, and then also the more kind of inner workings of the music industry to make it a more accommodating place. Because as I know, accessibility looks completely different for everyone, and that's been a big part. That's been a big journey for me to go on as well. Just knowing that, for example, it was in around 2000, I think it was probably around 2015, we basically said publicly that we would no longer play venues which aren't accessible. I never realized that in my research. Wow. Okay. Yeah, which we've stuck to, but actually what's the more time's gone on, the more my eyes have been open to like, well, where's the line with accessibility? Because although most of the venues that we have played have been wheelchair accessible, there's so many other elements to it, and it's why I've started making videos. Basically, I'm not a TikToker by any means, but I've started making videos on social media where I basically show what accessibility in venues looks like from my point of view. Yeah, and it was I really just started doing it because no one else was doing it. No one else in a band was doing it. I mean, people make videos from the point of view of music fans going to festivals and shows, but no one, like artists, it's not really something that artists have kind of got on board with. And I think it'd be wicked to see more artists doing it. Definitely. So yeah, that's become a little bit of a pet project of mine. So now when we're actually, to answer your earlier question, how do you cope with touring? What I've started doing now is, in all that kind of time between getting into a venue, doing a sound check, doing a show, what I do is I go and make an accessibility video of what that venue looks like. And I basically show, I don't use it to, what's the word? Like out. I don't use it to out venues or to sort of show bad practice, but I use it to show best case practice. And I'd be like, look how brilliant this independent venue is. Look at all the things they've thought about. Just like, wouldn't it be great if more venues could follow their lead? And it's been really cool, and the videos have had a really cool response. And I'm going to push forward with keeping on doing it, just because, I think it's important, and especially now than ever. It's a really tricky time for music venues because, just because of the economy and the live music economy. Business rates being what they are and all this sort of stuff. It's a really difficult time for the live music sector. And obviously in COVID, venues took a real blow. And so, like I said, I don't make these videos to out venues in any way. It's really just to celebrate the venues that have gone the extra mile to be accessible. And it's wicked. It's just like, it's so great to play shows and to just feel like everyone in this room is having a great time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because I think what you've touched on there is something I always bang on about, which is obviously being heavily involved in the disabled digital community. One thing we always do is always focus on the negative. So you always see like an airline's really messed up or a festival's really messed up because they've not done this, that, the other. But no one ever talks about the fact that actually this festival got this absolutely spot on, but no one's talking about it because it doesn't. Negativity sells, positivity does to a certain extent. It's really interesting, but like I think you've literally encapsulated that of like, no, let's show the positives. It's like when because I've seen it before, like I've gone to festivals, had a great time, and I actually, when I first started going to festivals, was amazed at how accessible they actually were. Because when I first started going, I thought, it's a no-fly zone, I'm not going to be able to do it, I'm not going to be able to enjoy it. Then I went to a couple and I was like, actually, this is pretty easy. Like, this is as set up as it could possibly be. But then on the flip side of that, particularly from a physical disability side of things and a wheelchair user, I used to see people posting and saying like, oh, it was a nightmare, it was muddy, this, that, the other. And I'm like, it's a festival in a field. What do you think is going to happen? There's only so much that the venue can actually do to try and minimise that.
Yeah. It's so true. And I mean, I got to say, I mean, I started going to festivals when I was probably about 14, 15. And honestly, they've come on such a long way. And I think, you go to festivals now and the disabled platforms, which is really, that's only one aspect of what accessibility looks like at a music festival. But like the disabled platforms are full and like everyone's having a wicked time. There's disabled toilets. There's disabled campsites. I mean, Glastonbury was a really early adopter of the Attitude is Everything Charter, which is basically a kind of classification system for venues and festivals, depending on how accessible they are. And Glastonbury was really early in getting onto that. And it was my first festival. And I it is muddy and it's miles between stages, but it's like it's a mission for everyone, if I'm honest. Like it's an endurance test. A festival is an endurance test for everybody. But I think thankfully from the point of view of both disabled artists and disabled like music fans, they are so much better than they were 15, 20 years ago. Like, take it from me, it's like there's been a huge improvement. But having said that, there's still so much further to go. And I think what you were saying about people who, I suppose take a more kind of negative stance and call, like airlines and things like that out. I think there's a place for both, to be honest. Yeah. But I just think if everyone's just like shouting into the void, nothing's really going to happen. I think you need to celebrate improvement and development and progression where you see it. And I think I've kind of made that my mission objective. And there's lots of people that are complaining, and I think people shouldn't stop complaining. I think it's really important to complain, but I think if everyone does that, I think it's difficult to see hope. Do you know what I mean?
100%. And I think as well, my thing is always, I worry about the narrative that then disabled people have, because it's almost like we're the moaning minis of the world. Like, we're just moaning about everything. And like, as I completely agree with you, moaning definitely has its place. And if it's warranted, 100% do it, because you're bringing attention to it. But when I see creators and that's the base of what they create, that's when it frustrates me, because I'm sitting there like, in that same sector, whether it be festivals, airlines, schools, whatever it might be, there's another one that's absolutely killing it, but you're not talking about that because it's a really tricky thing, because it comes back to what I started this podcast for, which was I really wanted like a space where I could invite an able-bodied person on that's never been involved in disability before, and they can talk to me like an open book. If they want to ask me about how it all works with getting a girlfriend, sure, let's do it, because that's what everyone asks me whenever I go to a bar, or whether it be how do you go on holiday, or whether it be what does the future hold for you? Do you have a limited lifespan? Whatever it might be, because I think a lot of the time people can get very sensitive, and it is a very sensitive subject, but I am a big believer of referral. We need to create like a referral culture of like, if you're not comfortable talking about it, pointing in the direction of someone that is, because
Yeah.
if you snap someone's head off, unfortunately, that's the image that people are going to have of disabled people. Now, I've had people come on and not try and change that opinion, but give me a different perspective, and I definitely have softened it slightly. But I do think that's a big part of it. Is almost, if you celebrate positive, then it then reinforces the wider community of going, at least our efforts are being acknowledged. Whereas a lot of the time it can almost feel for the wider community like, well, whatever we do, you're going to moan about. So why do we even bother?
Totally, I completely agree with you, and you know, I think there's a lot to be said about your stance and the way that, you know, what you've just described to me. I mean, I think, you know, the world, like, life's difficult. The world is tricky. Like, living is difficult, and it's difficult for everyone. And I think you can either add to, I don't know, you can either kind of add to the noise, or you can try and help shine a light through it. And I think that applies to anyone, disabled or not. I think, you know, you can try and say, you know, come with me. I found a way through over here. Let's go this way. Or you can just say, it's all fucked. There's no way through. You know, do you know what I mean? So I think there's walls, you know, like the barriers that are there, especially for someone with any kind of disability. The barriers are going to take our lifetimes to completely disappear. So in the meantime, you can just be hammering at the wall, or you can try and find a way around it, or to say, you know what, like, you know, let's try and find a way to climb over this thing, or to dig underneath it, or to go around it. And I think, you know, slowly those barriers are getting lower. But it's, you know, that's progress, isn't it? It's just, it's going to be an unraveling story for the next however many years. But I really think accessibility is snowballing, and I think just what's happened in my lifetime has been incredible. You know, like I can drive, I can travel, I can see the world. And you know, when I was a kid in the 80s, like, I remember someone saying to me, oh, one day you'll be able to drive a car. And they showed me what a car looked like, which at that time was like, it looked like a Mr. Bean car, like a 3-wheeled car with like a joystick. And I remember thinking, like, I don't want to fucking drive one of those. I want to drive like, you know, like
the Aston Martin.
or an Aston Martin, whatever, you know. And that's amazing, you know, and like, it's wicked. It's wicked.
Yeah, 100%. One thing I did want to ask, like, coming back to sort of the band, is what, obviously you guys have been together a long time, and I can imagine you've sort of almost grown up together. But what's the, like, how have your bandmates adapted to your disability? Obviously, a lot of people don't know about disability till they're exposed to it, and then obviously they've grown up with you, got to know you, then add an extra layer of, oh wait, we're going to start a band. That then adds another layer. So what's that journey been like?
Journey is definitely the right word for it, because I think in the beginning, if I'm completely honest, I was quite I felt what's the word, like I felt disability still felt very stigmatized, and I didn't feel like I wanted to direct the conversation towards my disability, not to the, you know, like, for example, when we did photos and things, I always asked my crutches to be left out of the picture. And it was around that time that I did the tour in the wheelchair that my whole perspective changed on it. And since then, I've been much more open in talking about it. And I think, you know, very fortunately, the band have kind of come on that journey with me. And you know, it's been great. I mean, you know, I'm not going to lie, there's been huge challenges. I mean, there's tours that we've had to cancel, and festivals when I've got ill and I've had to go in and have surgery. There's been a few like quite hairy sort of moments over the years, but the band have just been like, they've been brilliant. You know, they've stuck with it. And I think that's what friends do they? You know, you sort of, you jump in and you support each other. And I think that's what a band is. It's like a family, basically. So I've been very fortunate to kind of have that support. And I really feel for artists who are solo artists, which is, you see a lot more solo artists kind of breaking out now than bands. It's kind of changed a lot. We're not kind of in that era of indie bands. It's much more solo artists breaking through. And I do feel sometimes for artists that kind of going out there on your own, because you need to have thick skin, and you need to have really good friends and a support circle around you. And I think, again, that's another reason why I feel so honored to be part of Attitude Is Everything, because it's sort of helping to provide a kind of net, really, and a support circle for artists who are kind of trying to break out into the music industry, who are on their own, younger artists. So, it's tricky out there, but I've been very blessed, I think, to be part of a band of friends who have been super loyal and understanding and supportive over the years.
No, I can 100% get that. But I can imagine as a family unit as well, as bands often are, I'm sure there was definitely a few squabbles along the way as well.
Oh my God. Don't even start me on them. I mean, like, to be fair, the lineup of the band's changed a lot over the years. So like, people have sort of come and gone. Mm-hmm. And there's been some absolutely brutal fallouts and, hissy fits. But like, time is a great healer, and I'm still friends with everyone that's been in the band in the different sort of eras that we've been going. So, you remember the good stuff. You try not to dwell too much on the fights and the disagreements and stuff. But there's been a lot.
What's some of your biggest highlights with the band? Like, what are some of the things that automatically, when someone says that to you, you're like, oh my God, this was amazing, this was amazing, this was amazing. Obviously, it's all amazing on that journey, but there's definitely some points that just stick out.
Well, I think our first Glastonbury, which was 2008, that was the first time we played at Glastonbury, and it was long time ago. Yeah. But it was the first time that I think I looked out onto a crowd and they were all singing the words, and I didn't know any of them. Whereas up until that point, the gigs that we've been playing, it was our friends, and then our friends started bringing their friends, and you'd look out and you'd be like, oh, there's whoever it is, there's Chris, there's Matt, and that first Glastonbury was the one where it was like, fucking hell, like, where did all these people come from? And I think that was the first time that we felt like, okay, maybe we shouldn't throw the towel in. So that was a really special one. And also, to add to that, we just stayed up all night, doing what you do at the festival. And somehow we still had voices, and so that was an emotional show for a number of reasons. It was like an emotional peak, an early emotional peak for the band. But then, I don't know, I suppose just like playing abroad is always such a wonderful thing, for artists. Like, I think our first tour to Japan, that was really special, because you're in the furthest flung corner of the world that you came from. You're like, oh man, this is so cool, just to feel like, I don't know, I think being able to, I'm not someone that takes a lot of holidays. I sort of never have been. I'm a bit of a sort of workaholic. And, but the flip side of that is that I've been very fortunate that music has enabled me to see a lot of parts of the world, and I think most artists, don't make enough money to take like beautiful holidays 4 times a year. But the sort of the flip side of that is that you do get to travel and you do get to play in amazing places. And I think like playing in South America, playing in Japan, playing in Australia, it's wonderful to look back and think, like, I feel like I earned that because the music took me there, as opposed to I spent $1,000 on a holiday on some flights. You know what I mean? So I think that's definitely been the perks of it. But honestly, I think the reward for music just comes from, it's a daily thing of just like when you start to get that buzz of a new idea for a song, that's, you know, that's like more powerful than any drug. It's just that buzz that you feel when you're working on something that you feel is super exciting. It's like a song that you haven't written before, and you're bringing something new into the world that didn't exist 5 minutes ago. Like, that's still to this day, that's the thing that I'm chasing, you know, in music.
It's so amazing to hear as well, because then that really shows like a true creative as well. It's like, that is the love of it. Like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of the time you can get wrapped up in the recognition of it all, like of like someone going, oh, you've done a good job, or I like the song, rather than the actual process of doing it. And I think that's something any creative person battles with, whether it be social media creator, whether it be musician, whether it be artist. It's like this whole wanting the recognition because then it shows a level of success, but then also it's like oftentimes you listen to these business podcasts and they're like, as soon as you start getting paid for something, the magic kind of goes away because it becomes a job. Did you ever have that experience?
Totally. And I'd still say, you know, it's like, if I was told that I've got a week left to live and someone put a gun to my head and said, what were the happiest days of your life? I'd probably say it's like, it's before we had a fan base. It's before anyone knew who the fuck we were. It's before we had any recognition. It's when it was still just like this dream, you know, because in a way that's where it all comes from. And that's the thing, that's the feeling you're kind of chasing for the rest of, you know, that's the feeling you're always chasing, is that initial spark that made you want to do whatever you're doing creatively, whatever medium you work in. I think it's where that spark originally came from. And it's that feeling that I know that I'm still chasing now. It's like, what made me want to do this in the first place? And I think the more you can kind of reconnect with that, you know, as part of your, whatever it is, as part of your practice, whether it's, you know, mindfulness, meditation, whatever can kind of lead you back to just focusing on that thing that is at the essence of everything that you do, that made you want to do this in the first place. That is the thing to hold on to, you know.
I 100% get that completely. It's like, as I say, get back to the root of it, and then you get true fulfillment from it. Coming back to one of the things you mentioned earlier, like you've mentioned that you've had some wild stories as a band. What is one of the wildest stories you've had, maybe on tour or performing? What's one of the ones that maybe you haven't told before, but people might be a bit shocked by?
I don't want to get sued, Charlie. I don't want anyone to come after me.
All right, maybe tell us a podcast friendly one if one comes to mind.
Oh man, I don't know. They all feel like I'm sure when I finally one day sit down to write my memoir, I'm sure they'll all come flooding back to me. But I don't know really. I don't know if there's anything that embarrassing. I mean, we used to like play fight a lot. We used to wrestle a lot. So there's quite a few venues in the UK that we've been banned from for basically just like getting into fights, and just not like fights with the audience, but just being fucking liabilities and just beating each other up and just like trashing. No, we've never trashed hotel rooms, but there's definitely been a few backstage venue backstages that I feel pretty, now I'm thinking about it, I feel a bit cringe about it. We've just like had food fights and stuff like that. Again, it's the things that you can only blame on youth, really.
Yeah.
I think these days we're a lot more respectful of because we want to be invited back. But
yeah,
I don't know. I kind of feel like with all the, you know, all the war stories and battle stories, I think they sort of they lose their magic if you start to kind of dispel them. But I think there's been some messy times along the way, but I feel like you know, that's it's for the memoir, I think.
Fair enough. What about the biggest challenge for Mystery Jets? What was one of your biggest challenges as a band to sort of battle through?
I think music is such a changing landscape, and what's popular one year isn't going to be popular the next year. And also, just like in the time that we've been in the industry, the industry's gone through so many different kind of iterations. It's evolved so much in terms of the way that you release it, the way that it's monetized, the way that all the mechanics behind the scenes work, the way that you engage with your audience. And so I think the challenge really has been to kind of stay on top of that whilst not feeling the need to change, like feeling this kind of compulsion to like, oh, we've got to sort of stick with the times. I think in a way you've got to hold on to what's special about what you do, as opposed to feeling like, how can an older band still feel relevant to like younger fans? I think as soon as you start thinking like that, you're looking at it completely the wrong way around. So I think the challenge has really just been to kind of stick to our guns and kind of weather the storms, really. I mean, we've been through the experience of being dropped by record labels. I think we've been dropped by more record labels than any other band that I know. But then we've also signed record deals. So I think kind of navigating those peaks and troughs, which are really difficult. And again, I think must be in a lot of ways harder for a solo artist. I think when you're a band, you kind of just tough it out and you say, all right, well, that didn't work out, but let's just go away, lick our wounds and come back with new music, make a new record. So I think sort of finding the strength and mutual support within the group has been challenging at times. I think also, like, to be honest with you, a lot of the guys that have been in the band have got like kids now and have got families. So I think like a newer challenge in a way is to try and find like, where does the band fit into all of that? And it's people who are now, responsible for children and putting a roof over their families' heads. And it's no longer, I think when you're younger, you are the center of your universe. And it's like the number one goal is to kind of like focus on your career and just to get all your music out there. I think now it's like, it's a bit of a balancing act. It's like, okay, well, I've got bills to pay and I've got people that we employ, and like all these different kind of aspects of your life need to kind of look after themselves and support each other. So I think I'm not quite in that situation yet. I don't have kids, but I know that like we'll see like where life leads me. But I think like down the line, when that does happen, I know that I'll probably slightly change my view on like priorities. But I think just seeing it through bandmates, how like things come along which might be more important than the music, and I think you never want to stand in the way of that. If people feel kind of like that's the journey they want to go on, you've got to let them do that.
One thing I wanted to ask that you mentioned going through there is obviously changing with the times. How has it been adapting to, particularly with the blow up of like streaming services and digital music? How's that journey been for the band?
There's definitely been positive sides to it, in the sense that I think, we've ended up on kind of playlists which have introduced new people to our music. It's a bit like, like the Now compilations and things that used to have, like when you're a kid, like I think playlists are kind of like the new version of compilations. So quite often you'll play festivals, you'll play shows, and there'll be people there that have heard a couple of your songs on Spotify on a playlist somewhere, or like on TV, and then they know those couple of songs, so they're kind of like peripheral fans. So that's been a positive aspect in it, and there's a kind of like, there's a wider fan base who are aware of what you do and know a little bit about it, but they're not necessarily like fully plugged in to you as an artist. And then I suppose looking at it from the other side of things, it's meant that you just can't rely on streaming or record sales really to live on. You just can't. That's not a reality. It's really, I think as an artist now, it's basically, I think if you're a pop artist, it's things like it's like brand collaborations, and it's all this sort of stuff. But I think if you're an indie band, it's merchandise and it's touring, festivals. Festival season is like, that's where you basically make the money that you live off for the rest of the year. I think that's the case for almost every artist I know. It's like festival season, that's like that's the busiest time of the year, and then the rest of the year, like, you're in the studio or you're touring, but you don't really, with going on tour, you need to spend a lot of money to kind of like put it all together. So it's festival season. That's become more and more important for artists.
One thing I did want to ask, and forgive me if it's too personal, because I've never even thought about it, is how does it all work when it comes to being paid through streaming? Now, I think record sales from like someone who's outside the industry kind of makes more sense. You get a percentage of it, blah, blah, blah. How does it work with the streaming services? Stumped you here.
Can you hear the tumbleweeds?
If you don't know, that's fine. It was just so, I was like, I've never actually thought about that. That was an in the moment question.
I think the grim reality of it, Charlie, is that you don't really see much income at all. You know, I think you get a PRS statement, which is basically that's where all your music's kind of collected. PPL, PRS, they're the sort of the bodies that collect all your streaming revenue, and or like, music that's been used on, like, on running playlists in gyms, or like on TV shows, or like random kind of, documentaries in Turkey or wherever. It's like the places the music ends up is so weird, and it will be like 5p for this. But I think, you see like little kind of revenue streams coming from different places, but the way that we've always done things as a band is just like everything's shared. It just all goes back to like keeping the show on the road, really. So, it's difficult, I think, but you do need to stay on top of it all. And I think more than ever, you kind of need to be pretty savvy going into the industry, because the technology is there for you to be able to kind of like keep an eye on, like, where little explosions are going off, where kind of people are discovering what you're doing. So I think, I almost feel like going into the music industry should come with a crash course in, kind of training yourself to be able to like look at data and all that kind of stuff. It's incredibly boring, but like, ultimately it comes down to like, do you want to still be doing this in 10 years, or do you just want to like, do you see it as a bit of fun, or is this really what you want to do? I think if it's what you really want to do, you need to kind of take an interest in like how it all works, basically.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not necessarily from the tech side of things, just in general, what would be like one golden piece of advice you wish you could give to anyone coming into the music industry? Like, what's a closing message that you'd like to give?
I think I'd probably just, in a nutshell, I'd kind of end by just going back to where this conversation started, which is just about authenticity. I think just tell your story, and although to begin with it might just resonate with your nan or your boyfriend or your girlfriend, or like your uni mate, your best friends, slowly the more you stick at it, it will grow, and more people will take an interest in it. And I think I don't know, the way that streaming and all algorithms have started to kind of change the way you can't really second guess where your music's going to end up. But there's also wonderful things about that, and people can kind of end up stumbling across what you do by complete fluke, by complete accident. And I think you just never really know who's listening. And I think we've found this in music, like we get messages sometimes which sort of just completely reassure you that you're doing something good in sticking with it, because you just never know who's listening with music. And there could be, music's so fucking emotional. It's like it accompanies us throughout our day. All the experiences that you go through in a single day, chances are there's bits of music that are like the soundtrack to your day-to-day existence, whether you're listening to like hip hop, whether you're listening to rap, whether you listen to film soundtracks, whatever it is, it's all the soundtrack to your life. So I think that's something just to take comfort in when you're making music is that you are providing the soundtrack for someone's life right now who you possibly don't know and will never meet. So just I don't know, just like be authentic, be yourself. Don't try and be Adele. Let Adele be Adele. Don't try and be the 1975. Let them, you know what I mean? Just like be you, and that's the best thing you can do. It's an incredibly cheesy thing to say, but I think, like, I don't know, I think that's the golden rule.
No, I think you're right. I think one of the most powerful messages you said there was like, music follows people everywhere. There's music for every kind of mood, and I'm 100% good with that. My music taste is all over the place. While I said that, obviously a bit of a rap head, always have been, but you look at my playlists on Spotify and stuff, it is the most clusterfuck thing you'll ever look at.
Yeah.
There's 70 songs in there, there's 60 songs, it's everywhere, but then most of that comes from, like, depending on what mood I'm in, and that perfectly summarizes it. It's like music is everywhere, and the idea of not having music is kind of terrifying. Like, I'm not a musician, I'm purely a consumer, and even the idea of it disappearing for me is like, no thank you. But yeah, it's so true. Just closing off, which is, I'm going to ask you my last question, which I ask every guest, which is, what's one piece of politically correctness that you really strongly agree with or disagree with? It doesn't have to be disability related. It can be absolutely anything you can think of. Something that just you really want to out there in the world that you either hate or love.
I'll probably sound very much like a millennial in saying this, but just like, cancel culture can fuck off.
Yeah, I'm with you there. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I just feel like, I think what's going to happen is, I don't know, like, I think there's going to be a new generation who are going to come forward after people who, you know, like Gen Z or whatever, people who are kind of late teens, early 20s now. And I think there's going to be a new generation who are going to come through and who are just going to give a massive fuck you to that. And there's going to be like, you know what? I don't know. I mean, I think it's a really important part of the culture that we live in to hold people to account. And I think, you know, very much that applies to politics, that very much applies to all sorts of aspects of life. But I think there is just this sort of, I don't know, there's this kind of like feeling that everyone needs to be, you know, like slipping up isn't permitted in the culture that we live in. Yep. And slipping up, making mistakes is a huge part of life. I think you can't learn unless you make mistakes. And I think, you know, you cannot be a dick. You cannot be a creep. You cannot be all of those things. I 100% support that. But I think you know, life is messy, and I think growth is messy, and I think people need to be more compassionate to allow people to slip up in order to find like their path in life. And I think cancel culture is, I think, one of the worst things that sort of come out of our time. And I think it's performative. I don't think it actually does any good. I think someone just needs to disappear for a bit and say, I'm doing the work. And then they sort of come back. And I think, I don't know. Yeah.
No, I agree. I think it's that whole thing of like, allowing people to get things wrong. This big thing of like my education when it comes to disability, of like, I don't care if you use the wrong terminology. What I care about is if I then explain to you why it's an issue and you constantly do it. Like, we've all done it where we've said the wrong thing at the wrong time and gone, oh, that was poorly timed. But then also it's that whole thing of just people being in constant fear, and also this whole, like, there's definitely a merit of being able to call someone out, but you can call someone out without it being an aggressive attack and like ruining someone's mood, day, career, whatever it might be. I think it's really tricky, but I do agree. I think it's just, people just need to allow people to make mistakes. As you say, that's how we grow. That's how some of the best things we have in this world are through a mistake. I think, if I remember correctly, not saying it's the best thing in the world, but champagne came from a mistake. And so did, like, and I mean, I'm making myself sound like an alcoholic, but so did Guinness. Guinness was a mistake. Yeah. Right. And it's like, mistakes happen, but sometimes they can be the best thing. And
this is the thing, you see, when you're a kid, you're encouraged to make mistakes. You're encouraged to, like, you know, pour I don't know, like, you know, you see kids with like science sets, and it's like, what happens if I watch my nephews with this? They're like, what happens if I pull like oil into this cup, and then I put ice cream in, and then I put juice in? What happens if I then drink it? And you just want to say, like, just drink it, see what happens. Like, you will find out what happens, as opposed to saying, no, you can't do this, it's wrong, these things, you know, and then scolding a child. Children, when you're young, you're encouraged to like look at the world with curiosity and try things, and you do make mistakes. And I think then as adults, people are punished for their mistakes. And I think, you know, I think there's so much to be taken from the way that you come into life. There's something you need to take from that and kind of carry through life with it. And I think it should not be this fear of tripping up, because everyone trips up, and like, we're humans, we're flawed. That's what humans are, you know.
100%, and I see it as a creator. Like, the amount of times I will create social clips for this podcast, pick a title, and I'm like, that's a good fucking title. But then I pick up on one word, and I'm like, if I use that one word, this could all come tumbling down. And that's the worst feeling to have. So it's a crazy world we're living in. So I 100% agree with you there. But just as a closing tradition, obviously very grateful that you come on today. So where can people find you if they want to find your music, if they want to get in touch with you, get in touch about some projects that you're working on? Where can people find you?
Yeah, so if people want to check out the band, we're on all your kind of usual streaming platforms like Apple Music, Spotify, Tidal, Amazon Music. And then we're on all the social medias, I think. We're on TikTok. We're very new to TikTok. But the others we're on like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all that kind of stuff, or X as it's called now. Yeah. So yeah, like, hopefully we're fairly easy to find. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an awesome conversation, and also I've learnt so much. So hopefully everyone else that listens to it does as well. Wicked.
Nice one, Charlie. And well done for just for doing what you do and sticking with it. And I think it's so great to see platforms like this, you know, you using your platform to just like look at the world from a slightly different perspective. And also just like anything that's kind of removing the stigma away from people being able to talk honestly about like their life, their situation, whatever their situation is, I fully 1000 get behind and encourage. So like, I think it's brilliant. Well done.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Not Quite Podcast. Please make sure you follow us on TikTok and Instagram to get regular updates about the podcast.